Drawing boundaries, borders, designed to include one single group of people exclusively within a state on this planet is nearly impossible because of the great amalgamation of diversity of people that we have on our planet. So naturally, when borders are drawn, there is going to be at least some, if not quite a lot, of diversity within the state. Do you remember this diagram I created for you? The green people, the purple people, and the gray people, and how they were all ending up in a variety of countries because the borders were drawn without cultural consideration, geometric boundaries so-called. Do you remember this map of Africa that shows the ethnic diversity of Africa? And remember, there's overlap in pretty much every single case that you see on that map. You're probably aware that in 2022, the Russians invaded their neighbor, Ukraine. When they did that, many countries attempted to find diplomatic solutions. Kenya was one of these countries. And after the invasion, the Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations, Martin Kimani, went on the floor of the United Nations and he spoke about this very situation. Keep in mind that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, argued that Ukraine is not a country because it was created by Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. Interestingly enough, Vladimir Putin has said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. That's right. Worse than the Holocaust, worse than World War II, worse than the Great Depression, worse than the pandemic of 1918-1919, worse than World War I. Yes, for him, the greatest disaster of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he has spent his time attempting to rebuild that Soviet empire. Well, this is what the Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations said. I'm quoting from a Washington Post article. Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, Kimani went on, Kenya and other African countries chose to abide by the borders that were externally imposed rather than form nations that looked ever backward into history with dangerous nostalgia. They did so because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. This is what he said, because of course there's going to be diversity in states. It's how do you deal with it? Do you remember what a nation state is? This is a nation with its own political unit. In other words, there's no large numbers of minorities. There are not really a lot of these, although remember, the terminology gets thrown around in different disciplines in different ways. Diversity is almost always inherent within the state model. I can think of very few countries that are nearly 100% one single group of people. Maybe Japan, it's 98% Japanese. So, there's a thing called nationalism. Now, nationalism can be good and bad. Nationalism is a feeling that certain people belong together, even when they may very well be ethnically or racially or linguistically or religiously diverse. Okay? That's what nationalism is. Now, it takes many manifestations. Could be rooting for your team during the World Cup. There's a certain amount of nationalism, obviously, to that. Governments have real interest in promoting what's known as centripetal forces that are at least partly going to be based on nationalism. Centripetal forces are these. These are attitudes and feelings that pull people together and are used to promote unity in a society. Governments have this unique interest in promoting these things, as you can imagine, which is their own survival. Things like flags or patriotic songs or holidays, national anthem, the Olympics, your soccer team, even war. Now, there are also things called centrifugal forces. These are the forces that pull countries apart based on things like ethnicity and language and religion, for example. If a country has centrifugal forces, so there's a pulling apart kind of at the seams of the country, what may very well be happening is this. There may be a self-determination movement that's happening. This occurs when a group of people, it's usually a minority or at least an oppressed group of people, strives for the right to govern themselves. So they no longer want to be part of the larger government, they want to govern themselves. And in a lot of cases, they are looking for complete and total sovereignty, which is political independence. Now, some places are better disposed to creating nation states than others, just based on diversity, of course. Most places are multi-ethnic states. These are countries with more than one ethnicity, but where viable self-determination movements do not exist. If you live in the United States, you are living in one. Switzerland is one of these. Brazil is really a multi-ethnic state. It is not ready to pull apart at the seams. Even Uruguay. However, a multinational state is a different thing. This is a country with more than one ethnicity and where self-determination threatens to break the country apart. Now, there are many countries like this. The United Kingdom actually has this going on, of course, in Northern Ireland, but Scotland has had an independence movement. Wales even has an independence movement. So even someplace that you would think might be stable, like the UK, is not like that. Iraq, as we've seen. Belgium, the former Yugoslavia, broke apart. There are two ways this might manifest itself. First, in something called separatism. This occurs when a group of people seek self-determination. In other words, they want to break off and create their own country. This is kind of what has happened with Scotland, where Scotland, which is the northern part of the island of Great Britain and part of the United Kingdom, has an independence movement. It doesn't want to join another country, it just wants to break off from the UK. It wants to be separated. The other thing is irredentism. This occurs when a group of people in one country attempt to unite with a similar group of people in a different country. This is really what's going on in Northern Ireland with the Irish Catholic community, that they want to unite with the rest of the Republic of Ireland. And indeed with Iraq, with the Kurds, where the Kurds in Iraq and Iran and Turkey and Syria really want to unite together as one single independent country. So break off from the countries they're in and then make one united Kurdish country, Kurdistan. These things, separatism and irredentism, can result in something called balkanization. Balkanization is the breakup of a large political unit into smaller political units, and it comes from an area of the world known as the Balkans. Now, this has happened in many places, but the term comes from the Balkans. The Balkans is this area right here. This is the Balkan Peninsula. It's the area between the Adriatic Sea, the Aegean Sea, and the Black Sea. So it includes Romania, probably southern Hungary, and all of these other places, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Albania, Greece, Bulgaria. All of those things are part of the Balkans and the Balkan Peninsula. It's a very complicated area. So, there was a country there called Yugoslavia. It was founded in 1918, so right after World War I. And it included all of these now independent countries: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia. All of these were all included together as one single country. And it was called Yugoslavia, which means the land of the South Slavs. And the idea was that after World War I, they thought, well, these people are all Slavic, they should be able to get along with each other. And then after the collapse of communism, beginning in 1989, there began to be a civil war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. And what ended up happening was Yugoslavia broke apart, balkanization, and it turned into these 6 countries: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, which really has these 2 parts of Vojvodina, and Kosovo that are kind of semi-independent, even completely independent to sort of, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Same thing happened in Czechoslovakia, only without war. Right? This is what Czechoslovakia looked like. It's really 3 states: Bohemia in the west, Moravia in the center, and Slovakia in the south. But in 1993, the Slovaks voted to break off from the Czech Republic. This was largely because they felt all the power was in Prague, and they wanted some independence and power of their own. And so they broke off non-violently into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Sudan is another country that's gone through this. From 1956 to 2011, Sudan looked like what you see right there in red. That was Sudan. But Sudan broke into a civil war, and in 2011, it broke up. And you can see that southern part broke off, and now there's a Sudan and a South Sudan as independent countries. And in fact, if you look right here, Eritrea and Ethiopia went through the same thing, where Eritrea broke off from Ethiopia. Now, there are general forms of government: unitary states and federal states. And both of these have some ability to control multinationalism and separatism and irredentism. A unitary state is this: it's a country that has a strong central government. The local and regional governing bodies do not have significant decision-making powers. A federal state means this is what the United States is: the local and regional governing bodies have significant decision-making powers. So in one, you are concentrating the power of the unitary state. In the other, a federal state, you are dispersing the power. If you look at this map, you can see the unitary states are in blue, the federal states are in green. You can see the United States is clearly in green. Several countries in Europe are in blue. Even though Russia's in green, in reality, Russia is not really a federal state. It is, but it's all controlled by a central government, a very strong central government. And you can see China, of course, North Korea, of course, Vietnam, of course, many countries in Africa. You can see Cuba. So you can see that there's a certain pattern here, and the pattern is dictatorship. So totalitarianism is this: it generally goes along with a unitary state. It's a system of government with complete and total control of all mechanisms in the society. The government is centralized, dictatorial, and requires complete subservience to the state. If you think about it, things like Stalinist Russia, Mao Zedong's China, Hitler, Mussolini, today, Xi Jinping in China, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, Bashar Assad in Syria. Saddam Hussein was like this. And you could even make the argument that Vladimir Putin is indeed a totalitarian.